Can you describe what a hedge fund is? I mean, there's a term
Oh,
that's very common and people hear all the time, hedge fund,
yeah.
and what have you. Just describe it for people that might not know. And then also, when you say that you were involved in creating a hedge fund in Korea, talk to us about briefly about that as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I mean, hedge fund is kind of the anti-definition of what it isn't. Like, it's not a mutual fund or a prospectus fund, which is basically anybody can buy. Usually they're for richer folks like accredited investors or institutional investors. They use what we call LSD, leverage shorting derivatives, two or three of those. So they might buy $130 worth of stock with $100, and then they short or they sell stock they don't own for another $30 or $50, so that their market risk is lower than what you'd have in a typical index fund. And they're also using derivatives too. They don't have to actually use the physical stock. So that gets pretty complicated pretty fast. But really, it's something that has a different return stream from buying stocks and bonds. And they usually compared to those two because those are the underlying investments. So it's not an actual different asset class. It's like they call it the strategies, there's about various strategies within that. And they're just using stocks and bonds and cash and derivatives as building blocks to create their trades. Entirely different from what we call like traditional alts, like real estate and private equity, where they're buying the equity of a company, or they're buying real estate, or they're doing some lending, which is pretty unidirectional. Okay, you got this bet on inside of it. Might be some leverage, but it's not as complicated as a hedge fund. Yeah, and there's and then in Korea, we actually created fund of hedge funds. And so we had there were regulations that came out of the Korean government, and they had concentration limits, the number of funds per fund that we created. And long and short of it is we delivered very diversified baskets of these hedge funds to the Korean investors. And it was well, it sounds a lot more complicated when I say it that way, doesn't it? It's a tough part. That's why I like some of the other stuff that's like, okay, we're buying land, we're buying real estate, and you can kind of see the rents come in and that. But there's a whole lot going on there.
That's
Awesome.
great. That's
Yeah.
great. And just for me to quickly jump in here as well, like, when you're dealing with the funds that have certain type of asset, if it's real estate, energy, doesn't matter what, mining, doesn't matter what sector they're